My name is Tammy, and I lost my son due to stillbirth. This is Julian. Julian is one of many consolation gifts that I received after losing her son. And though I'm incredibly grateful for all the gifts and the love and the support that we've received during this incredibly difficult time, obviously that doesn't bring back my son. It's not the same. Sitting in his nursery, this is an empty nursery. It's very eerie. It's very eerie to be in here in one sense. In another sense, it's a little bit comforting because I can still be close to him. So today I want to share my story. It's still even really hard to even say the words, the story of losing my son. I never imagined that this would happen to me. I believe it. I still can't believe it. The reason that I'm making this video is this was one of the most tragic, traumatic things that have ever happened to me in my entire life, and I've been through a lot of shit. I didn't think anything could compare. Nothing can compare to this in my mind. I've had some good days, as good as they can be after losing your child, and I've had some really, really, really bad days where I would rather be with him than still be here. So I know that stillbirth isn't talked about very much, and there is a lot of stigma associated with it, and for some people it's just incredibly difficult to talk about, and it is. But I feel like it's part of my calling to share my story with others who have gone through similar situations, because especially during the initial stages of my grief when I first lost Julian, I was just desperately searching for anything, some kind of comfort, some kind of sign that I wasn't alone. And I reached out to YouTube to do that, and there really wasn't that many videos. The ones I could find were incredibly helpful, but there wasn't that many. And I feel like I'm at a point in my journey now where I want to share my story with others. I want to bring that hope and somewhat of peace back into someone's life that lost their son or their daughter, and they don't know how to cope. They don't know how to go on. I want to show them that it is possible. It's not easy, but you will make it through. So let's start at the beginning, in some of the more happier times. So my husband and I had been trying to have a baby. It took about 9 months until we conceived Julian. And I remember I went and took a pregnancy test, and I was sitting on the edge of our bed. And I wasn't expecting it to be positive because I I kind of get addicted to taking pregnancy tests, and I had taken so many that were just negative and negative, 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 and I was starting to really lose hope, honestly, that it was going to ever happen for us. And that popped up positive, and I was so ecstatic. I was so happy. We were so happy. Um, it took a while to sink in that I was actually going to have a baby. We were going to have a baby together. But it was one of the happiest, most exciting moments of my life right there. That had finally happened. It was actually a few days before we were going to start actual fertility testing, which I've heard happens a lot. It's right when you're about to, I guess it's when you're finally let your guard down and your stress level goes down a little bit, then sometimes it'll just happen. And that's what it did for us. My pregnancy was pretty smooth, I would say. I always kind of had the mindset that my pregnancy was just going to be this terrible, bedridden the entire time, can't do anything, can't move, can't, just constantly throwing up. Um, and luckily for me, I got very lucky that it honestly wasn't like that. It was actually a lot smoother than I had expected it. I did have the initial first trimester throwing up here and there, but other than that, I just had the normal symptoms throughout my pregnancy. A lot of the heartburn, shortness of breath, discomfort, trying to find a good position to sleep in, all the normal things. But I wouldn't say it was anything extreme where it severely impacted my life, and I'm very grateful for that. I know a lot of people will have some really bad pregnancies, and others will be pretty smooth. Some people won't even have any nausea or anything like that. And every pregnancy is different, but mine was pretty good. And every doctor appointment that I went to was great. Um, all the testing that I had done was great. They were always able to find a heartbeat very fast. It's the appointment that I had where I heard his heartbeat for the first time was just incredible. And they asked me if I wanted to have it on a recording just to keep it, and I said no. And that's something that I regret now. But I can still hear it. I can still hear his heart beating. As the pregnancy progressed, he started to kick. It was the coolest thing ever. It's so cool. Just to know that you have this human being inside of you, and you're creating this person. It's going to be your child, that is your child, that you're going to raise and love. And I loved him already. I loved him as soon as I knew he existed inside of me. I wanted to find out what the gender was as soon as possible, just so I could plan and do those little fun things of decorating the nursery and the gender reveal. So we had a blood test done, and I had the nurse actually call me and leave me a voicemail. I told her I'm not going to answer the phone, just leave the gender on a voicemail. So then I waited for my husband to come home from work, and we listened to the recording together. And she said, "You're going to have a baby boy." I was so happy. A part of me had always wanted a girl, but the other part of me was, I knew I was going to love this baby so much, just as much as I would have loved a girl. The story gets harder from this point. I was 35 weeks on the dot, I believe. And I wasn't feeling him move as much as he typically would. At this point in the pregnancy, he moved quite a bit, and especially after I would eat something, or eat something first thing in the morning. And I just felt him move less than he had been doing, and I noticed it. And a part of me was worried, and another part of me was, maybe this is normal. This was my first pregnancy. I really had no idea what to expect. And I Googled, as one does, and I did read a lot that said, once he's getting bigger, there's less room, and they won't be moving around to the extent that they were before. And I also texted some friends, and I stated my concerns, and they all pretty much were unanimous. They said, trust your gut. I mean, you know your body, and you know your baby. You know how your baby functions throughout the day. And you just have to do what you feel is right. And I took that into consideration. But I still didn't act on it right away, because I still was, I guess, kind of assuming that I was overreacting. I didn't want to go to the hospital and them tell me everything is fine, which is obviously what you want. But then I would feel like I just didn't want to be a burden, and like be a burden to my husband and to drive me. And so I ended up waiting. And the next morning, I still didn't feel him move. This time he wasn't moving at all. Up until this point, it had been a few kicks here and there. This was over the course of maybe 24 to 48 hours, this whole time period. So I ate a donut, because usually a little bit of sugar will kind of hype him up and get him active. and I felt nothing. And at this point, I was working from home, and it was just starting to really eat at me. The more hours would pass, the more anxious I became. And my husband was in the office, and I called him. And I told him I'm really worried that something's wrong with the baby, because he's just not acting the way that he usually acts. Most babies have a routine, and mine had a routine, and it wasn't the same as it had been a couple days ago. So my husband came home, and we decided to go to the hospital just to make sure everything was okay. At this point, I didn't care if I was overreacting. I just wanted to make sure the baby was okay. And I remember on the way to the hospital and walking through the hospital, and my husband and I were just kind of joking around and playing with each other and having fun, and we were kind of lighthearted about the situation. We were trying not to be concerned, I guess, because we figured everything was going to be okay. And turns out that wasn't the case. It ended up being the worst case scenario. But that's moving ahead a little bit. So we get up to the maternity ward, and I lay down on the bed, and there's a nurse that tries to hook up the little belt thing to monitor the baby's heartbeat. And she kept moving it around, and kept looking back at the screen and then looking back at my belly and not saying anything. And after about 30 seconds of this, I kind of glanced over at my husband, and I'm like, what? This is kind of strange. And I asked her, is everything okay? And she responded, she said, yeah, everything's fine. He's right there. I'm just trying to find a good spot. So I was like, okay. And then 30 seconds later, another nurse comes in, takes over, and starts doing the same thing. At this point, I'm just kind of being silent. I'm confused of what's going on. And then another nurse walks in. They're all kind of just not saying anything. They're all just taking turns trying to find the heartbeat as we know it now. And the doctor came in, and she sat on the bed, did more of the trying to find the heartbeat. And then she looks at me, takes my hand, looks me in the eye, and she said, I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat. In that moment, my husband and I just lost it. Especially him. I was more in shock at the moment, but I did just burst out crying. And he was sitting in the chair next to me, and he usually keeps his emotions in check and keeps his emotions together. And when I heard him scream, so we were losing it together pretty much. And I was kind of in denial at the time. I was like, are you sure that there's no heartbeat? I mean, what are the odds that you're wrong? And the doctor said, I'm about 95% sure that he's gone. We would just need to get a ultrasound in to confirm. So the ultrasound tech came in, and you could just tell by the look on her face. There wasn't any activity. There was no heart activity at all. Sorry about the lighting, guys. It's starting to get dark outside. So if I look a little orange, please disregard that. The doctor was amazing. I don't think I could have asked for a better doctor there that day. She held my hand the entire time as we just laid there and tried to somewhat grasp what was going on. And she was talking to me, and she asked, do you want me to leave you alone for a little bit? Do you want me to stay here? And I wanted her to stay. And I had so many questions. I said, where do we go from here? What's the next step? She said, you have to deliver the baby. And that was kind of another blow for me, because I just had gone through a nightmare scenario. I'd just been so traumatized, and now I had to go through this labor and delivery and deliver a baby that wasn't even going to be alive. It was really hard to grasp. But I knew that it was just something I was going to have to get through with my husband by my side. And she walked out of the room to give us a few minutes. And my husband and I kind of just held each other, just bawling. And I remember him saying, we're going to get through this together. I don't know how, but we're going to get through this. I couldn't think about anything at that time. Part of us were still in denial. Even as we got checked in to the hospital room, we said, well, maybe they just missed something. Maybe he'll come out alive and crying. We still had hope. Not a lot of it, but we were trying to hold on to anything that we could possibly muster to get through this horrendous situation. It's daylight again. I had to stop filming last night. It got a little bit too dark in here. So we are just going to pick up from where we left off. I think that we left off right at the part where I was going to be induced to have my baby Julian. I think for anybody, especially a first-time mom, this would be very nerve-wracking. Just, you don't know really what to expect. And there would be a lot of emotions involved. But I think it's a whole different dynamic when your child is no longer alive. It's just, there's no excitement, there's no happiness, there's nothing to look forward to. It's just straight heartbreak, dread, sadness, anger, all the emotions. And it's like you don't want to go through with what you're about to go through. The hours and hours of labor and pain, because frankly you're already in a lot of pain emotionally, and you know that you're going to have to add to that, and there's no other way around it. You don't have any choice. The doctor started off by giving me Pitocin to induce labor. So we had to wait a few hours for that to kick in. And in the meantime, while you're laying there in the hospital bed, just kind of waiting, grieving, everything that you can imagine just going through your head. I let everybody know. I sent out a lot of just texts because I couldn't keep myself together to make a phone call to anyone. And I told them that Julian was gone. And obviously everybody was incredibly supportive. Everyone tried to call me and they wanted to come be with me and do whatever they could, but they obviously were in such shock, the same way that my husband and I were. But I didn't feel like I wanted anyone there aside from my husband. His name is Matt. Besides Matt and I just couldn't cope with having anyone there. I just needed to be alone at that point with Matt, and he was in agreement. And all we could really do was just be alone with our thoughts and emotions and just try to talk through what we were experiencing and the long journey ahead. So instead of just the hours going by in anticipation of your new baby's arrival, it was just silence. Just a silent room, knowing there's nothing at the end. Like there's no light at the end